Hello everyone, it's Jack from Visual Effects Hut, and today we'll be looking at one of our production company EMAGIC's shorts that we did for the Stranger Things. Shot this one shot on the red V-Raptor, graded it in Resolve, and we've exported the grade so we can just do the straight compositing, straight colour correction, and then just export a transparent layer and throw it back into Resolve for further colour correction if we need to. So we have just got this plate of it moving, with a little bit of extra camera move added in After Effects, just to help it look a bit more handheld, because it was quite a safe plate. So then we needed to go in and do the animation. So this is a Demigorgon that I modelled, one petal too many. So I based it on a human that I made ages ago, just exaggerated a few features, nothing crazy, because I didn't want it to be too similar. So yep, and then standard human rig for the rest of his body, and then this was its own little rig. And in the head rig, we had all these joints, and I used the numbers 12, 8, 10, 2 and 5 like a clock, so that I knew where everything was. So that's 12, that's 2, that's 5, that's 8, and then that's 10. So it's like a clock, so it's easy for me to navigate. And then rather than manually adjusting each bone, I'd set up morphs so that I can go in and adjust each petal it's in its own right, and put them here in again the clock order. So 12, I can adjust this, get it to pinch down, and then I can just animate that over time, saving time rather than moving that bone and that bone, and it just takes ages. So that's how that was done. Then for the shot, I used a Rococo motion capture suit, which I'm still not too happy with, in all fairness, not in the UK anyway. We don't have much space, and there's pipes under all the flooring, so it's not very good. But if you stand on the spot, it's decent. So for this sort of thing, it was fine. That's kind of why it's quite limited throughout animation wise, really, the short. And all it was just the monster realizes we're there, and then opens his petals and makes it look as if he's going to start running. This is just the motion capture data that we recorded on its own from the Rococo suit. And then obviously my separate rig on top of for his head. So once we got that, we then shaded it, chucked it through Octane. So this is the results that I was getting. And obviously we set up lighting to kind of try and match the shot, but I exaggerate the subsurface scattering a little bit by adding a light on top, so it makes it look like there's light coming from the back of his head. So that's just like a normal HDRI with a shadow here, and then we've got these just to help accentuate this redness coming through. So that was all the 3D stuff. And then once we jump into After Effects, all I did was, we've got our plate, get our monster, throw him in, and obviously it's the same concept as Wendigo. It comes in 2 red, but I do that on purpose because it allows me to crush it and get rid of any noise as well. So if it's a bit noisy, once I grade it down, it'll get rid of the noise, which is a good little trick for subsurface scattering. And also it's just a good way of keeping colours if you're really going to crush shadows, because here it's quite dark. So to do so, all I did was add the curves, so that brought him down a lot. Let's put up the resolution a bit. It's not that noisy actually. So literally just curves. I kind of tried to match the colour as much as I could in Octane as well, because I had the back plate on. And then just without grading, and then I use this tritone, mapping some colours from the background to help blend it in a lot more. So there we have our Demogorgon, and then he turns his head and looks at us. So the only other thing that I did to make it look quite realistic, which I had to do in Resolve, but usually I'd do it in After Effects. The only reason I didn't do it in After Effects this time round was because it's the first time I've ever used red footage. It was 8K and it absolutely makes this PC struggle. So in After Effects I'd normally use motion blur. I usually use pixel motion blur, as the force motion blur doesn't really work, but real smart motion blur is actually a lot better. But I don't have that yet. So I used the pixel motion blur, but I put it on top of all the effects. And as you can see, now he's moving his head fast. There's a lot of motion blur around his head, which is pretty cool, which makes it look more realistic and removes the CGI look, that crisp edge. So that's pretty cool. So when I rendered the Demogorgon, I rendered it quite soft on the edges, so it's slightly out of focus, so it blends in and doesn't give that horrible CG crisp look. So moving on to the next shot. But some people didn't realise that this was actually CG, which is pretty cool. Obviously I can tell because I did it. So the purpose of this shot was literally just trying to be able to cut someone out of an 8K clip and then put something behind them without green screen. So what I needed to do was first cut out the talent Loretta, and then I applied an effect, brightness to contrast, so when she walks through the door it gets darker, lighter over time. So she pops out the door and it gets brighter. So once I'd cut her out, I needed to start working on the house, so I modelled it in Octane and Cinema 4D, just working on the front, didn't bother with the rest of the house, and just creating cubes for inside the rooms. This is the flat render that I ended up with, so it's just the front of the house. So the reason I wanted to do this was to get it look like we've got a bigger production value and get it looking like we had actually got a venue. We got a little room for someone to walk out of. So we then plonked in the 3D house, added a bit of curves and noise. So you can see that like we just tried to grade it down, blend it in a little bit more so it was darker. Added the noise to match the camera, although the camera doesn't really have that much noise. It's the new V Raptor. It's a pretty good sensor. If we jump into the pre-comp here, we can see that I have added extra layers on top of the house, and so I wanted to make it look a little bit dirtier, so I used dirt textures from Quixel and just used the soft light blending to kind of help blend it in a little bit, and then another dirt map to just make the whole house dirty. I then used warp and further curves to just help tweak the perspective and colour. So that was that. And then we created another layer. It's just the same house layer stretched, added blur, added curves, and it added like a little nicer roll off to the floor, so nice shadow towards the bottom of the house, on and off. And then this little house patch at the top was just a darkening to go underneath, on top of the layer as Loretta walks through the door. So it makes it look a bit darker as she's coming out of the door. As you can see, the colours on the wood of the house don't look quite right, but they was changed in Resolve and they look a bit more like this wood on the trees, which we can see here. The third shot I want to talk about is this Demogorgon close-up. It didn't turn out the way I wanted it. I wanted it to all be one continuous shot, not like over the shoulder of the Demogorgon and then revealing Loretta like we ended up like this. We wanted it to be more of a continued shot, but there was tracking fails and things like revealing too much of the background before we saw the monster made me have to split the shots into two. So background plate first, Yeah, the bright red layer, again, too bright, so just needed to tame it down with a bit of curves. And then tritone to blend it in. Looks cool. I wasn't happy with the mouth because of how the subsurface scattering come up there. So I rendered another mouth with a bit more detail. And then graded it with this one to match as well. Again, it looks a bit gamey, but once we've graded it down, it looks a bit better. So colour balance to get some of the colour out, curves to crush it down, and then tritone to blend it in. Then the slime tear coming from the top petal was not one of Visual Effects assets, but a try-and film asset. Really good stuff there too. So we tracked it on the top of the petal using just a standard motion tracker, and it follows along nicely. Graded the slime down again because it was a bit too bright for our shoot anyway, so we just darkened it, and then we set up 2 adjustment layers, once for camera movement, extra shake, and then another adjustment layer for the motion blur to help blend in the asset and make it look a bit more realistic. But yeah, those are the main shots that I wanted to talk about. Hopefully you've found them useful and interesting, and hopefully we'll be doing more stuff like this in the future. So yeah, keep watching and catch you on the next one.